Joining us now, Rob Wittman, U.S. House of Representatives member. That's called a congressman. He represents the 1st District of Virginia. That's along the Northern Neck area and Fredericksburg, all that great stuff. And he's also the chairman of the subcommittee on what we call sea power readiness, and he's with us now. Chairman Wittman, Dr. Wittman, man of many titles and surnames. Great to have you with us.
John, great to be with you this morning.
I know you're fired up about this upcoming election. So, look, I think you're going to win big, and I also think the Republicans are going to hold the House by 5. That's my early prediction, so we're looking pretty good there. I got to get to a couple of these issues. The Helsinki hysteria frenzy, what is the deal here?
Well, I think there was some concern about the issue of how the president addressed with Vladimir Putin the issue of Russians' efforts to meddle in the election. I think the president's since clarified that. I think there was an opportunity there for him to be what I call Reagan-esque with Putin. Reagan with Gorbachev was very, very assertive with him, and you saw what happened. The outcome of that. I think that President Trump has the same opportunity going forward. As you know, they've announced an invitation to Vladimir Putin to come to Washington. I think there's more that we can do with Russia to be very assertive with them, because obviously they're very, very aggressive and assertive. And the president yesterday clarified, saying, "Hey, listen, it's good for us to actually try to work with a country that has the largest number of nuclear weapons of any country on the planet, and you would certainly want to make sure that you're working with them." So I don't think it's a bad thing to work with them to make sure we're getting to a point where tensions don't rise, where you have that nuclear threat there, but also to be assertive with them in other areas where we know they are trying to destabilize this country. You see the things that are going on there. So I think that. A lot of what's going on was about the words that President originally put out there, and I was concerned about them. I thought that there was a missed opportunity there. The President came back and clarified that, said that he misspoke. So I think he's put that in proper perspective and is taking the necessary actions going forward with subsequent press conferences to talk about how he feels about Russia's effort to meddle. He did make it very clear that Russia did meddle in the elections, and we absolutely have to hold them accountable for that, and we have to take further actions going forward to make sure we stop or prevent any further meddling. And if there's any, even the littlest evidence of that, we have to go back after them. You heard Secretary Pompeo yesterday talk about it. You heard Dan Coates yesterday talk about it at the Aspen conference. So I think you find that the total administration is laser focused on Russia's efforts here to make sure that there is no influence in this upcoming election cycle, to do everything possible, because, I know folks across the country want to make sure that our election process system and the election coming up is beyond question, and that we take up any issues where somebody may be trying to take action that would interrupt either the election or question the integrity of the election by somebody trying to electronically influence it.
My whole thing is, what are we going to do going forward, Congressman Wittman? And I think you've addressed that without me asking the question. What are the steps in place to go forward? Because the Russians are going to be meddling in our election, France's election, Germany's election, Israel's election, you name it. That's their trade craft. They've been doing it for 100 years. Now it's just different. Whether they admit it, they don't admit it. Of course they're doing it. They always do it. So this whole thing, the hysteria over this to me is perplexing. All we need to do is put the right steps in place, and whether or not we, hit them over the head with a golf club at a public meeting, I'm just not sure what that has to do with anything, right? This is and then they lie, right? I mean, if you follow Russian history, Soviet history, right? They meddle, they get involved, and then they lie about what they've done. They've done the same thing since 1919. Should be any shocker to anyone. one, and I think you're spot on. Let's focus on what are we going to do going forward so it doesn't continue to happen. We're with Rob Wittman, Congressman, Republican, 1st District in Virginia. He's the chairman of the House Armed Services Sea Power and Projection Forces Subcommittee. That's a key slot on the House Armed Services Committee. Dr. Wittman, if I may, I want to get to Israel. May I?
Yes,
nobody is covering this, and I'm so frustrated with the fake newsers because this is like a huge thing that just happened. Israel just passed a law that defines the country as a Jewish homeland. Now, they just basically legislated into permanent second-class status 1.8 million, almost 2 million citizens of Israel that are Palestinian. And again, if you follow history, I mean, it's one thing to be a second-class citizen because that's your culture. It's another thing to then legislate them into oblivion, which is basically what the state of Israel just did with, I suppose, the Trump administration looking the other way or not reacting to this. And then you have to compare this to apartheid in South Africa. I mean, it's kind of the same thing in a way. What is your reaction to this?
Well, I think Israel, and rightfully so, feels that their sovereignty, their right to exist, is at issue, and it is. I mean, the Palestinians, as you know, refuse to recognize Israel's right to exist, as well as many of their adversaries in the region, and under those circumstances, where Israel is saying, "Hey, listen, we are going to clearly state that the Jewish state has a right to exist. We're going to acknowledge that this is a Jewish state." It doesn't mean that the Palestinians aren't also asserting within that area their right to have, as they have wanted, a Palestinian state. But I think feeling the continued pressure, not just from Palestinians, but also from other nations there that are aggressive to them, like their neighbors. You see what's happening there in Iran, trying to destabilize the area. You see what's happening with their effort to try to create a Shia crescent in the area, and Israel feels more and more under pressure, and where their neighbors around there not only are not going to acknowledge their right to exist, but are out for the destruction of Israel. So I think from that standpoint, I can understand their want to say, hey, we're going to assert that the Jewish state has a right to exist. Now, I don't discount that they are responsible for dealing with the Palestinian issue there, dealing with the West Bank issue, dealing about what the definition of Israel is going to be, and that's been the issue since Israel's existence. Is what are the boundaries going to be between the Palestinian state, which is what the Palestinians want set, and where Israel is going to exist, and that goes back to disagreements about where Israeli settlements are being put in. There on the West Bank in areas that Palestinians say are theirs. So, listen, those things are differences that are extraordinarily difficult for both sides to be able to work out because, let's face it, they've been in conflict since the existence of Israel. But Israel, I mean, listen, I can understand. I'm not going to say one way or the other whether it was something that from the United States standpoint, we would have necessarily done, looking at it from that viewpoint. But I can understand Israel's sense of the risks and their neighbors, trying to take away, not just the right to exist, but to destroy them. So I think this is an assertion to say, listen, there is a Jewish state. It is Israel. It is going to exist within the boundaries that we state, since there hasn't been any agreement about what those boundaries should be in the efforts taken up, both by the United States, other nations, Palestinian Authority, Israel. So I think Israel says, hey, listen, if there's not going to be an agreement there, we're at least going to assert our right to exist, and this is who we are, and this is what we will be. short of a larger agreement.
We're with Congressman Rob Wittman, Dr. Rob Wittman. He's also the chairman of the subcommittee on Sea Power Readiness, Republican 1st District. That's the Central Virginia area. He's up for election for another term on November the 6th, and he's running against Democratic opponent Angie Williams, I believe that's her name. If not, I'll have to look it up. Sorry. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday, after the vote, told the Knesset, he said, this is a defining moment in the annals of Zionism and the history of the state of Israel. Of course, this just isn't a symbolic thing they did. I mean, these are laws that they relegated basically Arabic to a secondary language. We don't know what that means, if they're going to change maps and train schedules and everybody's got to speak Hebrew. We don't know that. But the Palestinian, Congressman, the Palestinian members of the Knesset obviously condemned the bill. And let me just read you one quote here from Ayman Odeh, the head of the Arab Joint Alliance. And there's about 18, I think, Palestinian representatives in the Israeli government that represent their area. They tend to vote in the bloc, obviously. But he said the Knesset has passed a law of Jewish supremacy and told us that we will always be second-class citizens. I mean, that was his statement. And some people are comparing this to apartheid in South Africa. How do you respond to that?
Well, listen, what I would do is to compare it to, I would compare it to the United States. If we look at it from that standpoint, obviously we're a nation with lots of different faiths. Israel, though, was formed originally as a Jewish state. Now, obviously, in an area where Palestinians are part of that. Palestinians are indeed part of the government. I fully understand their frustration and how this, from their standpoint, is not something that I think doesn't make them feel like they're maybe being pushed or being marginalized. I think, Israel obviously is going to have to define what does this mean. I think the further definition of this is going to be key to make sure that they are mindful and respectful that Palestinians do live within the state of Israel. They do have representation there on the Knesset, and that you can't disenfranchise them. You can certainly say that Israel is a Jewish state, but I think the key going forward, John, is making sure that this doesn't marginalize, doesn't discriminate against Palestinians. And listen, I fully understand Palestinians' frustration with this, concern with this. I think, as you point out, it's going to be key as to what does this legislation ultimately culminate in, and
right.
what does it do to protect Palestinians that live there within Israel? It would be the same, as I said, it would be comparing it to the United States. It would be the same as what we do here in a Judeo-Christian nation, but we're a nation of all faiths. We have lots of different folks here, and we, as a nation, under our Constitution, recognize those different faiths. We recognize the value of having those variety of faiths, those individuals, who they are, what they stand for, and what they are able to do in our nation. And Israel should do the same thing. So I think with this, the key is going to be going forward to make sure that Israel, recognizes the Palestinians with the same rights, the same privileges as anybody else in Israel. Not saying that because it's a Jewish state that there's going to be somehow a proclivity towards people of Jewish faith versus those in the Palestinian population there.
You're right, because we don't know how this is going to play out. On paper, I have grave concerns about it, and the only way you're going to change. Somebody asked me the other day, how are you going to change it? And I said, only with, great public world outrage. 24 hours later, that's not happened. No statement from the U.S., no statement from the United Kingdom, nothing from France. The European Union put out a statement, but it was very tepid. And so far, crickets. So we'll see what happens. We're out of time. want to thank Rob Wittman for being with us. Congressman Rob Wittman, up for re-election November 6th, 1st District of Virginia, Republican. More information on his campaign, robwittman.com.